Well, guys, this is the one that you've been waiting for. Today, I'm joined by the Honourable Troy Grant, Chair of the International Rugby League, with a background in politics and a passion for the game, more importantly. Troy's leading rugby league's global growth. We're diving into the future of international footy, expansion plans, and much more. Thanks for coming on the show, Troy.
It's great to join you, boys. Thanks for having me, and congrats on the podcast. Really impressed with it, and happy to come on and contribute and answer any questions that you've got.
Thank you. Thank you. And anyone watching on the YouTube channel would have noticed that my usual co host, Stuart, is unable to join me tonight. But I do have Lavon from the very popular Waz Up YouTube channel. Lavon, thanks for coming on and welcome to the show as my co host.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, especially with yourself, Keith and Troy. I'm a big Kiwis fan growing up as a kid and then grew into an international fan, and so excited for the growth and the discussion tonight. I'm looking forward to seeing what the future of international rugby league holds. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And do you want to kick off, no time like the present, kick off the questions for Troy? We've got plenty of them, I think, with some fan ones too.
Yeah, Troy, we just wanted to start off, just asking about, what is the role of the chair of International Rugby League entail? Is it, some people won't know if it's full-time, if it's part-time, is it voluntary? Can you just share a little bit about the role itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2020, the International Rugby League moved to a model where they recruited 3 independent directors for the company, which is known as International Rugby League Limited. At that point, it was decided that there was difficulty in getting nations to agree on a way forward for rugby league with our self-interest dominating that issue. So they went to a recruitment process, and I was very lucky to be one of the first 3 that were recruited. I became deputy chairman and joined Greg Barclay and Emma Young as the first independent directors of the International Rugby League. I think it was about 14, 15 months later, Greg Barclay stepped down as the chairman. He was the inaugural independent chairman. He took on the role as chairman of the International Cricket Council, the ICC, so he was conflicted. He stayed on as independent director for a period of time for the remainder of his tenure and made a wonderful contribution, and I took over as chair at that time. So we've been operating since January 2020 in that model. We've just recently undergone some constitutional change where we've shrunk the board and changed the representation on the board. So we used to have 14 directors, and we've reduced that to 9 now. It's a sport that was over-governed, essentially, and there was additional costs that we didn't need to occur, that we were sort of running up that we didn't need to incur. So we've changed that model in consultation with the nation. So the independent directors are not paid positions. There is a stipend that's allocated to the chair, who's got some additional duties to do. However, because of the financial situation we inherited when we took over as independent directors, both Greg and I didn't take that stipend at the time. The finances of the IRL were not sufficient enough to do that. We felt that the purpose of the IRL was to reinvest money back into the member nations. So we forewent that. So essentially we were volunteering, even though we were entitled to be paid. And only at a point where the finances are now become more stabilised, do we either choose to or not choose to take a stipend, depending on the circumstances of the IRL's finances.
Yeah, and I'm sure the stipend isn't a substantial amount as well. So I think it's important that everyone realise that the work that's done on a largely voluntary basis as well. I know that, actually I'm pretty confident there's people out there that might even think you earn, 500 grand a year from this gig or something like that. We just need to clear that up. A lot of the work done, in fact, the vast overwhelming majority of work done for the IRL is purely volunteer, just like the people we speak to in other episodes that are on the ground running the game in, Albania or Nigeria, etc. So it's important that we differentiate that.
I think that was an important factor into why Greg and I made that decision some time ago. It has taken far more time as we've grown the game and sort of rebuilt it. It needed a complete rebuild, so it's taken significant time. So, but we recognised absolutely that the vast majority of participants in the National Rugby League were volunteers themselves. So, if we're going to lead by example, we thought that was the best way to approach it at this stage until we could justify any change in those arrangements.
Yeah, absolutely love that, and love some of the work that you're doing as well. The relationships between NRL clubs and international rugby league is probably the best that I've seen it in my lifetime. I suspect the strengthening of this relationship has a lot to do with you. Would I be right?
Oh, it's like really kind of you to say, but no, it's to do with just having a dialogue and having conversations there that just wasn't occurring before we arrived. So when I first joined, I was Sydney based, so it was pretty handy to give me access to the majority of clubs from there, or I had easy flights to get to the other locations for clubs. But one of the first things I did was reach out to the clubs, the NRL clubs, and get a proper understanding of how we could get them on board with release of players, supporting their players who are called up for international duty. So the NRL have it written in the contracts of players, and clubs are aware of it, that they must make themselves available for national selection. But as you know, over the years, there's been some manipulation around those rules, and I had a meeting with the leading CEOs of each of the clubs. I went and met personally with the likes of Trent Robinson, with Wayne Bennett, Ricky Stewart, and Mal Meninga, who had experience not only in NRL clubs but also on the national scene and also in England in Super League as well. So once I understood what their concerns were, we went about addressing those concerns. And I think over the last couple of years, they've seen for themselves that has improved, that it's taken away their fears. And their fears weren't without merit. And it was on us to overcome that, to give them the assurance that their players would be looked after the very best that we could.
I think
Yeah, very nice.
Trent Robinson is probably the most qualified French coach that I've ever heard of. When you think about it, his wife is French. They speak French at home, so the kids speak French. He's coached in he speaks fluent French. He has an understanding of the game. If he was ever parting ways with the Roosters, I hope that he goes to the Super League in some capacity, because that means he could be the national coach of France. I know he's got an involvement as some director of football or something like that, but we just need to make the most of Trent Robinson being in the game and his French connection, I reckon.
Yeah, and look, Trent and I talk infrequently. He's a wonderful guy and a massive internationalist, and he's given me some of the most sage advice I've received, along with Wayne Bennett. And what the major concern of the clubs at the time was that the international schedule wasn't really planned, that they were set up last minute, that there was no rivalry or real meaning to a lot of the matches or the tournaments that were put on, and the risk reward didn't match up. And so once we got that sorted and got an agreement with a calendar, which has been a real game change for us, the second thing was about supporting the players from a professional level of recovery, access to the best trainers, physios, and support staff whilst they were engaged in their national duties, and also better communication between the nations and the clubs themselves. If something happened to one of their players, or what their training loads were going to be, because there's always that impact on the next preseason, which then manifests into the following competition season. So, as I said, it wasn't without merit. But the other consideration where Trent really opened my eyes was a massive need for France to play more rugby league. And so we started talking and thinking, oh, do we get them to tour to play Australia and play England and play Tonga and Samoa? And Trent said, it's of no value to France. He said, because all they're going to be doing is learning how to come off their try line and kick off again. That's not where they get any experience in play, because they would be so outbalanced in experience and quality, that he needed to play nations more at his tier on a more regular basis, because that's where the real development occurred, was in game play. So their players could learn how to position themselves on the field, how to work in structures, how to actually understand defensive structures, attacking structures, and get the experience of a competitive match, put under pressure, fatigue. And there's a different type of fatigue when you're getting flogged in a rugby league game to a competitive fatigue. So once I understood that from one of the most eminent coaches we have in the professional game, that changed my mindset about fans' demands, which we understand what they're after, and actual proper development of the game to raise competitive levels and what was going to work and what was going to actually work against us. And some of those decisions ultimately prove unpopular, like the reduction in the amount of teams that are playing the World Cups, which you're welcome to ask me about, and I'm happy to explain. That's a part of the example as to what helped us make that decision. So they bring a lot to the reality of growing the game rather than just an expectation a lot of fans or some people may have.
We just wanted to ask, as you're sharing these experiences and, you've been in the role for a few years now, what has been some of the most challenging items and probably some of the most proudest things that you've accomplished for yourself personally in the role as IRL chair?
Yeah, well, I think, and I've spoken publicly on this before, the IRL essentially, it's a very small organisation, which is good in some sense that there's only small amount of employees, and the focus, if you think of us like a not-for-profit organisation, that's how we operate. We don't operate in order to raise money to build an empire that is the IRL. It's run very lean, and it's all about reinvestment of monies into the growing of the game internationally. It's not all about the elite. It's not all about international competition. It's actually about development of rugby league in country. That's what our job is. A lot of people misunderstand what our role is. Yes, we are the sporting federation. We sanction international matches. We own the World Cups. We own the qualifiers and all that sort of stuff. But our mantra and our main mission is to grow the participation and playing of rugby league across the world. That's our number one thing. On the back of that comes the other things. So we as an organisation essentially are like a shelf company with a very small footprint, but we were run very amateurishly. We were run like a tuck shop, I've described it. We had no proper governance. We had very poor financials. We had individuals who were um, using the IRL brand and the revenue to fill their pockets and have wonderful experiences around the world without reinvesting that money. So we had to change that. So we were running on the sniff of an oily rag, to be honest. And then COVID hit, the pandemic hit, and we had 2 years, no revenue, no competition. So it was a big mountain to climb to rebuild from there. And I guess the greatest accomplishment in our time, and I'm in my 6th year with the IRL, was the setting of the IRL calendar. So we have the first incarnation of regularity in competition. So nations know what they're doing from 1 year for the next decade. And we will build on that and we will refine that over time. But it's a really good start and everyone's bought into that. The second component is that we now have a clear pathway to develop and evolve a World Series. So we're looking at all levels of the games and enhancing regional championships so that we have a genuine pathway for improvement and progression into World Cup competition. It's going to take a long time. It's not going to happen overnight. The World Series for women's happening this year. We're unable to get a World Series up for men in the short runway that we had, but it's still on our agenda. It's our number one priority to get that happening. So I think the calendar's been the crux of the things I'm most happy with, but we're actually a really well governed and really properly transparent organisation. So we can tell the members where every dollar goes. We actually have a plan for investment. We have a plan for growth, and we have a real proper strategy going forward now to make us all that we want to be. And there's that famous line that rugby league never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
Our goal is to stop those things from happening, and we take advantage of all the opportunities that present ourselves. But they have to be realistic. They have to be measurable. They have to be achievable too, because we're not talking about pie in the sky stuff anymore, and we're not trying to be everything to everyone because we really don't have that capacity. We just set people up to fail or give them false hope. We're a very honest organisation. While that doesn't please everybody, we're only genuinely doing everything in the best interest of the game for everybody, and people have to lift to a certain standard to get the benefits of that.
Absolutely. Well, the first big question that everyone wants to know is when will the IRL announce the draw and game locations for next year's World Cup?
Yeah, a great question. It was actually discussed at our board meeting last week. The IRLC gave us an update on that. So I can't give you the specific dates, but very soon. They're just in some final negotiations with some governments in relation to venues, which will then dictate draws and pools and that sort of stuff. So we'll have a proper press conference. You'll be invited to come along where all those details will be announced, and hopefully that'll happen sooner rather than later, so people can get on buying tickets and doing the planning, which will be a wonderful World Cup.
Side question to that: is there any city outside of Port Moresby that could potentially host a World Cup game, like Goroka or something? Or is that too ambitious?
I apologise for my voice. I've been sick for the last few days, so
No problem.
yeah. There are 3 locations in Papua New Guinea. It just depends on the games, the expected crowd size. So they want to maximise access to any of the pool matches in Papua. So the biggest stadiums are in Moresby. So it makes sense to have them there for that purpose. But ground quality and size, they do have the capacity elsewhere, but Moresby is the favourite option.
Just wanted to add on to that in terms of that's fantastic to hear that there's going to be some announcements coming soon, because I know a lot of our fans, international fans, are excited about that. But also, as part of breaking up the World Cups 28, 29 and 30, specifically 30, how have the tenders, the current tenders for 2030 World Cup been going? And is there anything that you can share on how those applications have gone?
Yeah, so we met at the same time Vegas was on to discuss the 28, 29 and 30, and there's preferred tenderers for each of the World Cups. And now we're doing what they call essentially due diligence. So the bids came to us. They've gone through an exhaustive assessment process, and recommendations were made to the board, and we've landed on preferred hosts. So we're now working with those 3 preferred hosts, and also working with other hosts in case due diligence doesn't satisfy us with one, that we're still not wasting time with the second potential candidate. So as soon as that is completed, we'll make those announcements. So without locking me in on a date, I'm probably thinking around the August sort of mark. We should know that more clearly. If we're ready to announce 28, 29 before 30 or something like that, we will do that. But we're just waiting for the due diligence, because we've been burned a couple of times.
Fair enough. Yeah,
Years,
totally get it.
and we just don't want to be put in that situation by things that are outside our control. That's happened to us before. The IRL over the years and ourselves have made mistakes without doubt, but we've been really unfortunate with luck going against us. You know, you can't plan against a pandemic. You can't plan against the war in Europe and the significant cost of living crisis and a whole lot of things outside our control. But what we can control, we're doing our absolute best due diligence on that. And as soon as we are able, we will make all those announcements.
Are any of those 3 in Australia, New Zealand, or England? Can you tell us that?
No, they're not. No, they're not.
There you go.
Whoa,
That's huge. All right, my next question.
Listen.
Recently, the IRL announced that they would focus on 4 countries, that being Wales, France, PNG, and an African country, and provide significant funding. Now, a lot of people are confused by what do you mean by significant funding? Can you explain a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so we haven't finalised the framing of that to give you an exact answer, but the intention, I can tell you what it's about. So there's a saying that if you raise the tide, all boats rise. So what is obvious to us is that if we try to be all things to all people at once, then you actually don't achieve anything. So the targeting of specific nations in a calendar year or over a 2 or 3 year period, with additional investment, to raise their standards both in a domestic sense and also on the national stage, is what we're aiming for. So we're trying to get more countries who are going to be eligible and competitive to be World Cup qualifiers and World Cup participants. We've looked at the Northern and Southern Hemisphere. The Northern Hemisphere is our priority, given that we need more competition for England in the Northern Hemisphere.
I agree.
Given that they're pretty much isolated up there. They can't always be coming to the Southern Hemisphere to play footy, and Southern Hemisphere can't always be going there. So we need to live that. That's why Wales and France are the two most obvious who have the greatest domestic participation levels at the moment and are best placed to take advantage of additional and very strategic investment. There will be more countries in the future. These are just who we're starting with. Now, the question I get about Papua New Guinea is a legitimate question is, why would we be investing any money in Papua New Guinea?
Well, our next question, actually.
on the back, yeah.
Lavon, this is your question.
Yeah.
On the back of the federal government's recent investment into PNG for the NRL expansion side. And the reason's simple, that the PNG NRL side are going to be a licensed entity under the NRL competition, under the ARLC banner, etc., as a company. Off that, they will have formal contractual relationships. They'll have no doubt, centre of excellence. They'll have their own education pathways, and they'll have things associated with the brand that is the PNG team, whatever it ultimately is called. And I don't think they've come out with a name that I'm aware of as yet. So if you're talking about Cronulla Sharks or Wigan Warriors in the Super League, they are their own entity. They don't belong to the nation, for example. The Papua New Guinea Rugby League is the entity who's a member of us. So we're investing in them for the domestic competitions in Papua New Guinea, where there's a massive participation opportunity because it's a national sport. So many players want to play it, which would then complement the investment that's happening at the NRL club and associated investment pathways, etc.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I think this is a complete side note, guys, but I don't think that's big enough for an NRL team. It's got no roofs. Not a roof, but like there's no shelter on a lot of the grandstands, and it only holds 15,000. I'd love to see some of the money being spent on the team put into, maybe putting some roofs on those grandstand and at least boosting it to a 25,000 or 20,000 capacity.
That is all part of the plan.
So it is.
Stadium upgrade is all part of the plan, because the reality is that in those grounds you need to have a level of corporate capability for hosting corporate, because this is a game that relies on sponsorship from sponsors and investment from commercial partners. So you need to be able to host them, give them an experience and show them what they're investing in. So stadium upgrade is part of the plan for that bid, as well as a whole raft of other investments from pathways through to, they're ultimately centre of excellences and obviously the player accommodation, etc. that's been talked about as well. So there's a whole lot of things that are happening, coming from different funding buckets and a whole sort of thing that isn't IRL business, but that we're aware of because we have representation on the IRL board from Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, I love that. Also, Lavon, we're both Warriors fans. I love that our club has met its market in terms of ticket pricing and sold out every single home game last year. I basically think that PNG games need to be $5 or something like that. Something that, I don't want to see what happens here in Sydney, where I looked one time last year for a Thursday night game at Parramatta against the Cowboys. So a school night against the Cowboys, and a halfway line ticket was $129. Now, who's taking the family to that? So I hope the PNG team obviously we know they have a tremendous amount of funding. I hope they use that to offset ticket pricing as well. That's just a side note for me, Lavon. Any thoughts on that?
No, well, you got to capture the imagination, and especially it's important to portray an image straight away of what us as fans in other countries and especially Australia how they look at PNG. So I think they got to just do it right from the start. Personally,
Yeah,
get it right. So it looks good, and then the portrayal of that looks great back on the NRL, etc.?
Yeah, look, I've got it's none of our business, but I'm aware that there's some excellent people involved. Andrew Hill, he's formerly involved with International Rugby League. He gets it. Peter V'landys gets it. He showed with Andrew Abdo at the end of last year, they dramatically reduced the price on Kangaroos jerseys.
Yeah, great.
You can get them for under $100. And when
Fantastic.
I went to matches, all you saw was Jillaroos and Kangaroos jerseys everywhere, which I haven't seen in decades, which is a wonderful thing. You saw more Tonga at the Combank, I can tell you, but
Yeah.
that was also a sight to see.
No, you're talking our fans' currency. Tonga, Australia jerseys. Oh, excites me.
Yeah, mate.
Just talking about it. But sticking to the funding issue, or not issue, the funding strategy, I should say. When looking at the African country, would you choose South Africa based on potential with the established rugby union culture? Or perhaps, and these are the only ones that we can really think about because we interview guys on the ground. Nigeria was one that we had a couple of weeks ago, who were doing a great job with development, particularly in the women's space. Because most people assume it'll be South Africa, and that makes a lot of sense. But get to Ghana and Nigeria, are they in the running?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa. Yeah, absolutely, they're in the running. And we haven't made a decision yet. That's why we've said an African nation. So, yeah, we will be looking at all that. And like I said, it won't be just one country and that's it. We'll start with one, and then when that's going well, we'll then move and identify the next best to make that investment as well. Then don't forget, that doesn't mean there's no investment into every country. We're still investing. Probably what we're describing more as resourcings for development than just cash, for example. We just don't have a wad of cash because you don't know what the return of that is. The investment's better.
Fair enough.
We're buying technical education support, or we're paying for tangible things that's going to lift coaching and, paying for competitions or whatever that sort of stuff occurs. It's not. This is additional investment on top of that our member nations get through an annual grants process that we run.
Yeah, because we spoke to Arnaldo Tello, who's running the only Albanian rugby league team, and they're trying to get into the Greek domestic competition. And he's saying that basically most countries only fund Olympic sports. So, it might be it's different here in Australia, and it's probably different in England from what I know, maybe New Zealand with Spark or whatever it's called, or Sport New Zealand. But outside of that, mostly it's just Olympic sports. So they're doing it on their own. So I'm really glad you said that. Doesn't mean there'll be no funding, assuming they meet certain standards. So there is a clear goal of the standards. I'm assuming, like, from my economics sort of interest and numbers background, is that there must be a trust account separate from any other accounts and stuff like that is required to be a member. There used to be a minimum 4-team requirement to be classed as some kind of member as well. So I'm sure those standards are published. So it's really, really good to hear that there's a way there.
The important thing for us is that you have tangible outcomes. And the reality is, and if you look at the history of the game, whether it be in the north of England or here in Australia, we can't have, and I made these comments recently and people took them the wrong way, that we can't have people establishing rugby league in a country and thinking they're entitled to just a cash grant to help establish themselves. They have to do the hard work themselves. Rugby league in New South Wales started with individual people contributing money, took raffles at pubs and hotels, and volunteering on, barbecues and canteens, and that's how it started. And unless you can sustain yourself from an operations point of view on a local level or a domestic level, doesn't matter how much money we put in, you're not going to grow if there's not a groundswell of support domestically or locally. So you have to build up locally, as hard as that may be. You just can't have a third party come in and just dump some money and think that's going to add money and it'll work. Unless you have that volunteer base, people that are out there putting the hard yards in, that are out there fundraising or making money on the local level. If that's not existent, the game is not going to succeed in that area. As much as the passion may be there, you have to put the hard work behind it. So that's the point I was trying to make. And that occurs in majority of our members. Some it doesn't. Some countries are just basically have a rich philanthropic assistant who wants to pay for a national team to play in a competition on an annual basis, but does no investment domestically, and there's no domestic competitions in that. That's not a sustainable model that we can support going forward. So it has to work in reverse rather than this entitlement that a country should have a national team, just add money, it'll work. That's not the case. It has to be grassroots driven and built up. It's how it started in the north of England. It's how it started in Sydney, New South Wales, and that's how it needs to occur on the international stage as well.
Just on that, this was a question that was added to the run sheet, and you pretty much answered it there. But I'd be remiss in my duties with having you on, which is an amazing opportunity, not to sort of delve a little bit deeper in that. There were a few people that we know of that were a little offside. So the quotes that you made, very similar to the ones you just said, is that nations at all levels of development have to do their own lifting as well. There's been an entitlement attitude to being subsidized by the IRL, which isn't sustainable or realistic. Those days are over. Now, for the ones sort of starting up rugby league and expecting a handout, that's completely fair enough. But and I don't know how to word this, so I'll just come out with it. Can you understand that some nations might be offended by this?
Yes and no. I understand if they're reading it from a certain perspective or lens. But if they listen to what I just said and explained what I meant by it, then no, they shouldn't be offended, because if they're not doing that, then I stand by what I say. There's no country's entitled to just expect a handout or an injection of cash from a third party that's going to make rugby league successful in that area. That's just unrealistic. That's fantasy land. And the people that I know and people wrote to me directly who took offence, it doesn't relate to them, although they took it to personally. So hopefully it's clarified my comments. And I absolutely stand by them, and it was never my intention to offend anybody. It never is. But it's important that I'm honest and transparent with our members as well. And we're telling them what we're thinking, why we're thinking, and the reasons behind it. And, that's when you're quoted somewhere, and you got limited space, you don't always get the full opportunity that you do in formats like podcasts or one-on-one conversations to explain it so people understand it better. So there's always that risk people will take things the wrong way. But yeah, people offended, please don't be offended. That's the explanation, and they can either like that or not like that. That's completely a matter for them. But that's the position we've adopted, and I think it's the right one for the future of rugby league internationally.
Yeah, thanks for elaborating on that.
No, you're welcome.
Troy, I just wanted to ask you about other most popular sports globally. They have a variation or a different form of their own sport. For example, basketball might have 3-on-3. Soccer has futsal. Beach volleyball. The various forms. I mean, obviously, the obvious one for rugby league is rugby league nines. And is there a future? I mean, I was really impressed with the 2019 Rugby League Nines World Cup. I felt a bit ashamed that it didn't come back, or not that might not know about it. But is there a future Rugby League Nines, or even maybe say in a connection with a Rugby League tag or some other variation in terms of an IRL interest or some type of thing like that?
Yeah, it's not in our short or medium term plans, and I'll explain why. But we have other forms of the game which definitely are in the plans, and it's touch, tag, it's various forms of non-contact to increase participation as well. They're very successful here in Australia, and I believe there's varying degrees of success internationally as well. But there are a lot of non-contact options available there that can not only potentially increase participation in rugby league tackle side of things, but it also increases rugby league fans and supporters. So there's double benefits out of adopting different types of the game. But back to the crux of your question, I love rugby league nines. Personally, I took it as a personal mission to try and get us included in the Olympics for Brisbane 2032. We were initially knocked back by the former government in Queensland. As a organising committee, they get to, I think, to select a couple of sports as part of their program, and it wasn't their intention to include rugby league nines, not for not wanting the sport, because Queensland and Brisbane is very much a rugby league town. it came down to logistics. It's
Hmm.
they're looking at more individual sports where countries are sending 1, maybe 2 representatives. If you're sending 20 countries with a squad of 20 players plus board staff and whatever, you got to accommodate them, you got to feed them, you got to transport them. It's significantly costly. So it came down to a financial thing. They didn't have the money for it, which I totally understand. I get it. Rugby and rugby sevens in the Olympics has already got a strong foothold and is sort of, in some eyes, ticking that box from a rugby perspective. We believe nines is a far better game and would be a far better spectacle. Obviously, we've got a pretty biased view on that. But despite that, there's been a change of government in Queensland. So I've just reached out again and I've made contact with the sports minister. We've got a positive reply, and I've got a meeting with the CEO of the organising committee for Brisbane being planned at the moment to
Great.
canvass that question again. The chances of that occurring, probably are still minimal because of the same issues about cost. But I know there's a push for flag football to transfer from Los Angeles 28 to Brisbane 2032. But rather than flag football, we also have the option to introduce touch or tag league into the
Hmm.
Olympics as well. So it may not be a nines, it could be a different non-contact form of league as well as potential options. So that's all being explored. Peter V'landys, Andrew Abdo and others and myself are all working in tandem with each other to see what we can do in that arena and see how we go. So the concept isn't dead, just what it may look like, we don't know, and we'll just give it our best shot just to showcase rugby league on the Olympic stage, which then, as you referred to earlier, can help some nations if it is a recognised Olympic sport. We're also continuing down that pathway of eligibility as an IOC sport. There's a body called AIMS now. There used to be GAFE, I think it was the acronym.
And they wouldn't give us a look in.
No, that's been disbanded. So the Secretary General's working constantly to meet the criteria that AIMS sets for Olympic inclusion. So we haven't killed off that work. We're just being open and realistic about whether it's a priority at the moment or what the likelihood is at the moment. It's pretty low, and it's not in our short to medium term plans. And the reason for that too is that we just have such a congested window already.
Yeah.
We're limited by EBAs of how much players can play, and there's a lot of conversations going about with a lot of strong support from the NRL to look in time of shortening the professional season to allow for more international rugby league. So Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo are very strong in their support for international rugby league. But they've got a balancing act to do with broadcasters, with clubs and enough revenue. And there's a lot that goes into it that we aren't in control of. We certainly get the benefit if there is more international rugby league, and whether nine's part of that mix into the future, only time will tell. So not dead and buried, but it's not a realistic option in the very short to near future.
Yeah,
Enough.
great answer, and thanks for elaborating on that. Levon, any response to that?
No, we just want to say, I think there's benefits, and like you say, it could be tagged, it could be something else that is an alternative form that fans can buy into. My only thing was, a lot of these things are dependent on the professional players. Is there, for example, if there was a rugby league nines, could you have it with kind of New South Wales Cup or lower type players still representing Australia? It doesn't. I don't think personally it diminishes it. If
Fiji Silk Curls?
yeah, I still.
Great
Yeah, could
idea.
that be a possibility?
Yeah, nothing's off the table if that was to come to fruition. I know
Cool.
the professional players to become Olympians, I'm pretty sure they would want to buy in pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't imagine anyone. And there's a couple of Olympians in the NRL currently.
yeah. Right, good point.
The Roosters and the Storm. There's examples and plenty in the NRLW. So that's no doubt they would want to be part of it. But I think your suggestion's one with a lot of merit, and is potentially part of our strategic thinking going into the future for a whole raft of other opportunities for rugby league.
Thanks.
Well, this is actually a perfect segue. Part of your answer is the perfect segue for this next question, and it does involve the IRL, but there's also a lot of other stakeholders. What does a combined NRL, Super League, and international TV rights deal look like for the IRL and the financial benefits of it?
Yeah, so all these things are commercial by nature. So it's eyeballs on screens. It's about proving up um, data for the broadcasters because they need to know what they're going to sell back to advertisers who ultimately pay for these things. The biggest challenge you have in broadcasting of sport, particularly rugby league, is production costs. So that's been the killer in recent years. It's not the willingness of networks to broadcast or telecast rugby league with the introduction of streaming companies, all that sort of stuff. It's really mixed up the broadcasting market. So the challenge you have is production costs, and production costs means the cabling along the grounds that plug in or wirelessly connect to the cameras, the amount of
Yeah.
cameras that you require, the type of lighting, the lux that's in the lighting, so the standard of the lighting that's at grounds, signage, video referee applications, captain challenges, a whole raft of technology, bunkers. That's all entailed in what they call production costs, and all that stuff is bloody expensive. It's not easy, and if you've got multiple venues and grounds that you've got to transport all that to, that comes at a cost. You've got to staff it, employ. So it's not a simple dynamic. So the sell and why packaging NRL, International Rugby League, and Super League together is you're selling more eyeballs um, on a product that is what the word I'm looking for is a combined complementary product that you're offering to broadcasters
Yeah.
rather than a single entity. So it's not just the IRL trying to sell into a market with this much of the market, and the NRL's here and Super League's here. If you put them all together, it may be a more attractive offering to broadcasters, whether they be the traditional broadcasters or the streaming ones that are on the market now. But they will be factoring in the production costs into any of those negotiations. What part of that we play, or what cut of the pie that we get, and all that sort of stuff, that's all up for negotiation. The member nations would want to have a say in that, I would imagine.
Yeah.
If they're the product contributing to that, they would want to cut. So there'd be a lot of work to do in that space, and a lot of experts, far better knowledge of that space than I have, that we would entrust to represent us in that area.
Yeah. Um, in addition to obviously the World Cup's been divided, you've actually added some products as well, specifically the World Series, and that looks exciting as well, especially having a pathway into the World Cup, no doubt. Are you guys interested at the IRL in any other types of products? For example, in potential under 20s World Cup, emerging nations World Cup, any other type of products that you would like to expand your profile? And some of those, like I mentioned about the Olympics, wouldn't require professional players as such, but it does help to grow the greater platform globally. What do you think of expanding some more products for the IRL?
Yeah, look, the honest answer is none of them are bad ideas, and they're all got their attractions. It's a matter of whether they're viable or not, how much they cost to actually operate on, where do we get the revenue to pay for them, and at what. If you're going to pay for that, you're not investing in, so you've got to make that financial value proposition call. We invest in things that we know are going to be what we call lost leaders. So they're going to cost us money, not make money. But we know that there's a strategic outcome and the investment's worthwhile because there's going to be a dividend at a point in time. So you would have to understand what the dividend would be at what point and how much it would cost you to get there on any of those proposals. So all good ideas, but traditionally they have been run like the Masters games, for example. They've been run as separate entities just around the same time as World Cups to complement the World Cup offering. Physical disability rugby league, for example, So it will be run during the World Cup in 2026, but it's not an IRL World Cup. It'll be as it was in 22 in England. The Rugby Football League ran the Physical Disability Rugby League World Cup. It wasn't an IRL product because we don't have enough nations or member nations playing physical disability. So that's an investment that is being made, and the NRL are going to make a similar investment during 26 because we believe it's important. And I went to quite a few of the matches. The physical disability and the final was just it just melts your heart.
Yeah.
What rugby league means to everyone in our community. It doesn't matter what ability you have, and to see the joy and the pride and everything that came with that was really special for the game, and we need more of that, but we also need to make sure that we can afford to pay it without costing us investment elsewhere in the game until we have that capacity. We have the capacity to do all of it, we would do all of it. And in time, that's what we hope to do. At the moment, we don't, and we're trying to get there and build. And as we build, we will continually bring on more opportunities, but investing in what we have at the moment is our priority.
Yeah, completely fair enough and makes perfect sense. What is the IRL doing to support nations such as Nigeria, Albania, or Brazil in building sustainable domestic competition?
Well, the best thing we can do for them is make sure their governance is in-house, is in order, and is up to speed. From good governance, as boring as it may be, excuse me, and unattractive, and
What Danny said.
it's
Good
all that sort of
government is
stuff.
where it all starts.
Yeah, like, if you don't have good governance, you got nothing. That's just the reality. Administrators in sport get, polarized and chastised and criticized and all sorts of things at different time, but without them, there'd be no game. It's the same when you talk about referees, We all sit back as fans of the game and comment on officials and referees of the game. You don't have them, you don't have a game. It's true with administration. So that's the biggest investment we can make. And it helps them not have to do as many chook raffles or that, grunt work and volunteerism. It helps them hopefully become and look more professional to attract sponsorship and revenues in on a local level, so that complements what other investments they get from the IRL and elsewhere. The second thing is the provision of technical education, coaching education. That's the key. Is the skills we're working through for the first time ever last year. We budgeted for that specifically. We had the capacity to invest in technical education, and we had a lot of nations participate in that. That's not going to show success overnight, but that's a long-term investment that will see success. We're looking at AI and providers of that to make it more accessible for individuals, and different ways you can deliver that in the modern IT world. So we're looking at that and got some exciting announcements coming up about that to make more of that available. We're also looking at what they call recognition of qualifications in one country to another, etc. So at the moment, if you're qualified in New Zealand, those qualifications don't entirely do anything in Papua New Guinea, for example. So we're looking at being able to allow people to use those skill sets and qualifications across different countries as well. So maybe not the most exciting sort of investments or most important things to do, but I think getting the infrastructure of all that right is going to be more valuable than making fake promises.
Yeah, definitely. And this is on behalf of our non-English speaking rugby league playing nations. There is a bit of a frustration when the rules change, and the rules have been changing a lot over the last years. It's very hard to translate the rule book for rugby league into Spanish or whatever. And actually, because the words might sound the same, but there's a lot of nuance involved in it.
Yeah.
Is there anything that can be done to, if the NRL is going to change the rules, maybe they should pay for the Spanish rule book to be updated, and as opposed to someone having to go back and update it that's fluent in both languages?
Yeah, so just one point of clarification is the IRL owns the rule book, and within the rule book, the NRL and Super League are allowed to make localized decisions for those elite competitions. But the IRL rule book is the IRL rule book, and that's what all nations should work off. So we're trying to unify that as much as possible, to your point. And even Super League and NRL had some differences and still have a couple, I think, still, but they're trying to unify them as much as possible. And ultimately, the rules of the game will hopefully be all on the same platform. But the reality is, you have to have the fundamental rules of the game, but there's a need from an NRL and a Super League perspective to have that flexibility for the entertainment broadcasting component of it, to have that flex in order to make the game more attractive to sell, because the more they're able to meet the demands of the people that pay for the game, the more money they're able to get, which ultimately comes to us that we can reinvest in the game. So that's how the economic cycle works. And the reason for it, you can argue on principle all you like. Principle will end up with you broke, or you can be nimble and agile and meet the markets that you're faced with and reap the rewards of that investment, so that you can reinvest that into the game where everyone, again, that's how you lift the tide, and all boats lift with the rising of that tide.
Yep, fantastic. Troy, just in regards to the 2026 World Cup, we understand, there was a restructure of their World Cup from 16 to 10 teams. Can you talk us through that decision behind reducing the number of teams, and what is the impacts of that long term for the Rugby League World Cup moving forward?
Yep. So there's a couple of key considerations. The first one was cost. So the first decision we made was to break them out. So we had the three together, which had a lot of benefits. It was sort of a little bit like the Olympics. There was a wonderful collegiality. It was on that final day at Old Trafford when all the three genres of the competition came together at the end for presentations and on the field. It was remarkable, and the broadcasting of those three all happening together is remarkable, and it'll be the same in 26. But the reality is wheelchair and women's have elevated enough to be able to attract a market of their own and deserve their own World Cup. And the reality is the viability of running them individually is far more sustainable than running them as a whole. So it costs, you don't make as much revenue having them as a whole than you do individually. So therefore,
Gotcha.
it's a luxury to have them together, whereas we need to make sure that they're maximising the revenue they can make for the good of the reinvestment back into the game. So that was the number one, or a primary consideration. The second one was the product that we're selling in the World Cup. These broadcasters and those sponsors and commercial ones, as much as I love seeing Jamaica and Greece play, and there's the feel-good factor and all that sort of stuff, and such a wonderful opportunity for amateurs to play against the best in the world, the Kangaroos team, and then others who play professionally, etc. As wonderful that is, I take you back to Trent Robinson's point, that isn't actually developing the game, is kicking off and getting beat by 90 or 100 points. That doesn't work. And that doesn't offer us an attractive proposition to broadcasters or commercial investors. So we don't get money. We lose money having those nations that are uncompetitive. That's why it's been reduced to 10 to ensure the competitive pool is as tight as it can be, whilst we invest in other nations to hopefully expand it out again, more nations that are eligible. Doesn't mean it's going to be 10 forever. It just needs to be 10 now.
Yeah, that was my big thing. As long as if it's double the profit, because I remember 2008 was 2000 was such a disaster that you didn't have a 2004 World Cup, and then you had a 2008 World Cup, which my understanding is made 5 million Australian dollars. I remember writing at the time that if the World Cup can just aim to double the profit each iteration, rugby league will be in a good spot. Now, 2013 came around, and I was expecting 10 million Australian dollars, and the reality is I don't think it made much money, if any money at all. And 2017 was okay. 2022, my understanding is that once again it's just failed to make the revenue that the game needs to grow from its primary product. And something does need to be done. And my stance on it is, if it means that there's enough money to actually invest in developing nations generated from this 10-team World Cup, and it's not a permanent thing, 10 teams, then I'm okay with it. Short-term pain, long-term gain. That's my stance on it anyway. Not that it matters too
That's
much.
that's pretty much the stance of the IRL board. So that's the reality of the situation, is that we can run the 16-team World Cup and continue to lose money and have no money to invest in
Yeah.
nations, and we'll all go broke, and then there'll be no World Cup. That's the
Yeah.
option.
Could I just ask as well, Troy, is there an option? Is there an opportunity to change the draw format? I know that it was the 2008. They had the 18 games, and I've thought of ideas based off a soccer Champions League where they have a kind of a graded draw, but it's random, but still graded in terms of matches. And if you did that over 3 rounds, you'd get 15 matches. And then if you went into playoffs, you have maybe 3, 2, 1. So you'd actually end up over maybe the same amount of weeks getting maybe 6 or 7 more matches out of it. Or are you guys looking to maintain what was done in 2008 in terms of the number of games and the format?
So we're constrained by EBA and player loads and rest periods, which is different to some other sports. You can play a cricket match 3 days apart or whatever else. You can't do that in rugby league. In a football match, you can have shorter turnarounds and that sort of stuff. Well, we can't do that from an industrial employment base. And obviously, because of the high contact physicality of rugby league, it's not possible to do that without then having to extend squad sizes, which is then more cost and all the rest of it as well. So, so I'm aware of what's been proposed, and we're satisfied with it. We're happy. It was part of the bid proposal from the ARLC, and I just know that I can't wait for World Cup 2026. I think it's going to be the most competitive
Me too.
World Cup we've ever had, which will bring enormous excitement, I think, to the whole tournament. I think the women's, other than the Gillaroos, are so far out in front of everybody. The standardised competitiveness amongst the other teams is really getting close. So, we have to think strategically about how we bridge the gap between the Gillaroos and the rest of the world, because they're a phenomenon.
Definitely.
But the longer the NRLW goes on, the quicker Samoa, Tonga, and the other Pacific Islands will rise. Potentially there's a lot more English girls that need to get into the NRLW so they can keep pace, and Welsh and other nations where rugby league's played for women. So, that's the challenge going forward. But I'm happy, and I think it's not an easy thing to do, but I can promise you that the NRL ARLC organising committee for the World Cup, it's focused on the fan. It's the game day experience, and it's all about the quality of the experience at the game, the quality of the match, and also for the viewer. And it'll be I think a wonderful World Cup. And you tell me now, could Tonga or Samoa win the World Cup in 2026?
I think Samoa can, in particular. Tonga can, but Samoa excite me big time.
Yeah. So I get asked questions. I get 2 or 3 phone calls a week from journos asking me about eligibility and who can this player play for this country and all this sort of stuff and whatever. But if you have a look, and there was I can't remember what publication or where I saw it. Maybe it was even online on social platforms. But the potential teams, I think they listed 6 of them for the World Cup. They were phenomenal. I couldn't split them.
Yeah.
They were, if they're all available and eligible, and that's how they lined up, you dead set couldn't split them. And isn't that what you want from a World Cup, going into it not knowing going to win it? Every game,
Absolutely.
you don't know who's going to win. If you go and watch every match, you know what the outcome's going to be. Where's the fun in that? Where's the excitement from the fans? So I think, and the wheelchair games expanding. France and England have dominated without that, but I think the rest of the field's coming up quicker than people expect. Well, so there's improvement there. It's that big gap between the Gillaroos and the rest of the girls that is going in some regards, but it's also, you got to give credit to the Gillaroos, what they've done. They're an amazing sporting team and a phenomenal group of women who deserve every accolade they get. They're outstanding athletes, wonderful rugby league players.
Troy, there was an article in News Limited papers that Peter V'landys is seeking a $20 million international rugby league broadcasting rights. Well, is that actually true that he's going for that, and is that there a potential for that figure? But also, would that go towards, again, the strategy that you've talked about, helping the developing nations, growing the game globally? How does that all look if that is the case?
Yeah, so when countries bid for a World Cup, or entities bid for a World Cup, they put a proposal to the board to accept, and that has different conditions in it. So they guarantee a certain quantum of money to the board, and then there's a carve up of rights, commercial rights, broadcasting rights, different things that IRL potentially have, or the organisers get, because the organisers have got to make money in order to pay for putting the event on. They don't do it as a donation, so they've got to cover their cost. So as part of the agreement, the NRL have the Southern Hemisphere broadcast rights, and the IRL have the rest of the world, or the Northern Hemisphere, essentially, is how it's described. So, but the ARL, the NRL, or the RLC, sorry, not the NRL. The NRL's competition. The RLC are members of the IRL board, so they've got an interest in the Northern Hemisphere as well. So anything we can do in cooperation or conjunction with them, we will do, and work out the carve-outs of that sort of arrangement for specific IRL investment, compared to what ARLC raise in order to pay for the event, and then potentially reinvest into the International Rugby League and or what else, because they do a lot of investment into the broader international game outside of the Kangaroos or the Jillaroos as well, or the Wheelaroos. They do. They're a good partner. They're a good international partner for other nations. So they help out everyone essentially. So all that's within what we call a staging agreement, some contracts between the IRL and that body, and MOUs and all that sort of stuff. So that's already mapped out and been agreed to at the board level. So we'll let Peter get on with raising as much revenue from the broadcasters as he can. He's got a knack for it. And in Peter, or PVL, we trust. He's a great man, nationalist, and he's a hell of a good operator.
I love PVL and Apto, for the record. I think he's done wonders for the sport. But my last question for you, before Levon's last question, is what is the IRL strategy for getting more Tier 2 and Tier 3 nations meaningful fixtures between World Cups?
Yeah, so so just to understand this too, because this is a lot of confusion. So the IRL is not responsible for competitions outside our purview. So we run the World Cups, we run the World Cup qualifiers, we now run the World Series, which can double as World Cup qualifiers, and we are building a strategy to invest in the regional championships, which then creates a pathway. Other series that are organised between nations, either bilaterals, tri-nations, four nations, cups, bowls, ashes, whatever it may be, they're organised nation to nation or in joint ventures between the multiple nations. All that happens is once they're organised, they come to us to be sanctioned if they meet the qualifications as test matches or senior international fiction matches, they're called. So we're not responsible for the running or organising or operations of all international rugby league. We're responsible for the sanctioning of those as test matches, but we are responsible for World Cups, World Cup qualifiers, World Series, and looking at investment into regional championships to help build them up. Any of the rest of the activity is up to the nations themselves to organise, fund, and potentially sometimes they'll ask for funding, and if we're able, we will. Like we used to help fund the European Championships as an example in the Northern Hemisphere. We have helped fund or give some money to the MEA Championships as well. But it's up to those nations essentially to organise into bilaterals and other international contests for us to sanction. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. But there's a misapprehension that we're in control of who plays who, how many games are played. We don't. We control the rankings, and the rankings are weighted so that people, so two countries can't get together and just play each other 50 times in a year and race up the rankings. but would have trouble beating a New South Wales rugby league team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's some protections in the world rankings against that sort of stuff. But we encourage the playing of as much league as possible across the world.
Yeah, good answer.
Yeah, just my last question for you, Troy, was, looking 5 to 10 years in the future, like, what is your ideal vision for the state of international rugby league? And I want to ask, on top of that, like, what do you think your legacy will be? I mean, you might be here longer than 20 years, I'm not sure, but what might be your legacy in 5 to 10 years' time? And when you look back on it, and maybe even us as international fans look back on it, what do you think your legacy would be as well?
Well, I don't look at it through that lens from a personal legacy, but where I hope the
Yep.
game is. So just to clarify, so I've just been re-elected to the position for my final 3 years. So we have a limit of 9 years. So my tenure will conclude December uh, December 28th.
Mhm.
Wow.
I think that's when where I hope the game will be is that the World Cups will be viable and making the money they need to make and deserve to make. That we have the value propositions built up, so we're building up the World Cup, so they're a sought after thing that people are paying ridiculous amounts of money to host, and they're killing broadcast records, and we've got that as our staple revenue stream. I also hope the World Series is of such a respected level, we can build it to where it's a really sought after prize. I really hope that that's achievable within the next sort of 5 years. And I think it'll need a cycle, a 4-year cycle to really show its worth and prove its mettle, and also be an attractive commercial proposition. And I just hope the I guess the competitive level is equalised as much as humanly possible. And whatever is needed to do that, I hope that we have the capacity and capability to make sure that can happen, that we're not an obstacle. I spent a bit of time in government where I often got told from businesses and communities that we wish government would get out of the road. I don't want to see the IRL ever in the road with the progress of rugby league's growth or prosperity. And I think the way we've structured it, I'm pretty sure and I'm confident that that will never be the case, that we are set up to be like a not-for-profit. So it's all about our members. It's all about the game. It's not about us as an entity. That's really important. And I hope that mentality is maintained going forward. And, once a few of us have moved on, other individuals don't come in and try and use the IRL for their own personal purposes, as has been part of the history of the game internationally. So I hope that's where it's at. And, and it's up for people to judge whether they think I've done a good or a bad job over a 9-year period. But all I can do is my very best, and time will tell. And everyone's
Well, I think you're doing a great job. And actually, Stu would be angry at me if I didn't ask this relatively easy question. What is your favorite food and favorite cuisine?
Oh, mate, I love food in general. So, my wife's half Italian, so she's a wonderful cook. So when I met her, I was 79 kilos, and I'm triple figures now. So I can tell you how much.
Over a buck. Well, I know Lavon's 104, I think you told us last night.
Yeah,
Local
yeah.
local
My
call.
wife's the same, cooks too much, man.
Yeah,
I gotta go to the gym.
yeah. I can't. I'm not blaming my wife. I can only blame myself because I'm the one that eats too much. Just because the quality of the food's great doesn't mean you have to eat too much. And beer's got too much of an influence there as well. So favorite cuisine. My favorite dessert's apple pie ice cream and custard.
Oh, I
Nice.
love it. Right.
That's my favorite dessert without question. Geez, I don't know. Probably Italian. Just any linguine. Love a seafood linguine. I'll have
Yeah,
that
that's
if
quite
it's available anywhere. But I love it. I love steak. I love fish. No, I love. I just love food. So
Yeah, me too. Me too.
sorry,
Um,
I'm about to eat some lasagna. So
yeah, we won't hold you for any longer. It's been an absolute pleasure from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much for coming on. Anyone listening out there, you can no longer say that we haven't got the big dog on. Troy Grant, head of the IRL, chair of the IRL. Thank you for coming on the show. Any last words?
No, look, congratulations on the podcast. We really appreciate and value our supporters of the international game and the fans. We know how passionate they are, and we appreciate that. But what we've always tried to be is, in my tenure, is open and honest and transparent to everyone as well. We don't make false promises. We know what you want and you wish and you desire, but we've also got to make it real and viable. We're doing our very best to fulfill your dreams and hopes and wishes for international footy. We've got some wonderful people involved, and it's going to take some time, is reality. We in 2020, we're coming off a low base, and it's going to take us some time, and we've made some mistakes, and we'll probably make some more in the future. But we don't claim to be perfect, but we just always know that we're doing our best, and just keep supporting International Rugby League as you do, and I'm very confident you're going to love World Cup 2020.
Me too. And Levon, I think Stu's got some competition. Any last words from you before we wrap this up?
No, I just wanted to thank Troy for this opportunity, especially you, Keith, for inviting me. Big follower of the international game, and I think for me, just looking at the work you're going to do, Troy. Look, from my opinion, you may be looked as the foundation that planted the seeds for the massive forest that's going to grow in the future. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. The International Rugby League has been riddled with mistakes, and like you said, people taking advantage of it. And it's great to hear things like governance, simple things like governance, getting all those things in right now before it gets even worse. Sorting things in house right now, setting up for the future, I think is absolutely what International Rugby League has always needed. So appreciate the work you've done, and I'm looking forward to exactly 2026, 2030, and future World Cups and seeing the game grow. But thank you for this opportunity, Troy and Keith.
No, you're welcome, mate, and appreciate the plaudits. But can I really emphasise, it's not about me. I just lead a team of people, a couple of wonderful people in the organisation. I think we've got 4 permanent staff members, a few people that volunteer a lot. Lots of people volunteer on our committees and stuff. We've got a wonderful board. My other 2 independent directors, Emma Young and Laurie Daly, are exceptional. And, my board directors are just massive contributors. I'm just a spokesman on behalf of a organisation. It's not about Troy Grant. It's about us as a collective. And we're proud to serve, and we're doing the best we can.
Awesome.
Well, that's a perfect place to leave it. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you.